Silicon Valley investor, I have met many brilliant AI founders. Today, I'm excited to share the story of a founder who took bold risks and make some smart choices to build a breakthrough technology. His journey is a lesson in passion and hard work, so let's dive in. So, for those who don't know you, who is Nick? Can you share a bit about your story and how you get into AI?
Sure, absolutely, Patricia. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, I learned about AI when I was in middle school, junior high. It wasn't trendy at all at the time, but it just seemed fascinating. And the couple things I liked about it, one was the intellectual puzzle, where if you look at the brain, human brain, it's made up of these unintelligent parts, cells and neurons. They're not very smart, but they combine together to be very smart. So how is that possible? It's an intellectual puzzle. So that was interesting to me, and also the applications of it were interesting to me as well. So once you have human level AI, you've created a really smart being. Then the way computers work, you could have 10,000 of them. So because you can make 10,000 copies of them. So imagine once you have one Einstein or one Alan Turing or one Isaac Newton, immediately you could have 10,000 of them. And so what would it be like having sort of a whole millennium of say progress, intellectual progress happen in a year? And so the implications of that were tremendous. So that excited me about it. And so that's what made me go into AI.
Ah, I see. So you mean like super excited about like if a super intelligence come out and like he's better than humans, so it's kind of excites you.
Better than humans, but even if it's just equivalent to humans, having being equivalent to the smartest human and just having a million of those would be tremendous. It accelerate progress a lot. And if you think about everything in our world, a lot of the limiting factors are the missing intelligence, basically. So think of all these great software projects you probably hear about, or all kinds of, getting them, for example, getting to Mars, right? Part of that is hardware, but a lot of that is basically just creating the software to make the systems go and so forth. I could go on and on about lots of other things as well. So
yeah. So maybe it's your story that you first jump into AI. So what excites you most right now? I mean, like you are a founder at the same time you are AI researcher. So
right.
what is the one things keep you up night with excitement these days?
Right. Well, I mean, I've been excited about the long-term vision and possibility forever. So in terms of the new thing is basically just seeing what's possible right now. Because something else, I think people are a little bit too optimistic about how quickly we're going to get to AGI, human level intelligence. So, but in the near term, what's exciting to me is that what is being possible is for a lot of the traditional way people use software to be changed dramatically. So right now, you don't even realize how much inefficiency there is in your life because of all these different software platforms you have to use. You have one platform for email, another platform for video, another platform for keeping track of your contacts in your company, another platform for chat. Any company needs to have to run. And it's the same thing in your individual life. So if you think of all the time you spend integrating these things, copying, pasting from one to the other, logging on, logging off to another, do you think of all the workflows that would be much more efficient if these were all integrated in some way? That's a bigger obstacle to progress than we think. I think now AI and just and chat interfaces and so forth are going to finally create the opportunity to have unified software experiences that are much more efficient and make our lives actually much better and simpler and more effective than we think.
Yeah, I totally get it. And also, like, I know you are a serious founder, right? You used to used to build a company called SkyPhrase, and you sold it to Yahoo. You spent some years like working in Yahoo as other kind of experiences in different big tech companies, and then you start to build Dry.ai. So, what do you think is the key traits to define a great founders?
Well, there's a lot of traits and there's different roles for founders. But I think one thing I've noticed that cuts across a lot of great founders I've worked with and I've met is that they're able, on the one hand, to have the big picture in mind over what the overall goal of the project they're on, their company, their customers, whatever the product, whatever their mission is, but at the same time marry that to tactical sort of short-term choices about what they do and to have those be integrated deeply. So basically, at any given moment, whatever they're thinking about or working on, any decision they're making, they're not only thinking about the immediate problem or project, they have in their mind all at once how that affects the project overall. And how it affects the company overall. It lets them be much more agile in sort of engineering and designing a product. It lets people, when they're doing business development or they're doing partnerships, to really identify just the right partners, the right kinds of opportunities to tackle and not waste a lot of time. And so basically at every, product, technology, BD, marketing, lots of different sort of elements of the company, they're really good at integrating all at once.
I see. It's kind of like, you mean like he's good at cooperation with others. And also he has knowledge in every aspect of building a company. It's not like if a good founder he can't just know the technique, or he can't just know
That's
how
right.
to do business, how to partnership. He should know of it so he can understand every branches of his company to build this company.
That's right. A good example of that would be when the first Tesla models were being designed. I don't know, if the doors to a Tesla are these flat sort of handles. They don't have traditional door handles. And it turned out that was a huge amount of effort to do that. And it was very expensive and it took a lot of design and engineering effort. And so intuitively, that's not a necessary requirement, right? No one's going to buy a car or not buy a car just because of the door handles, right? So it's a very easy engineering choice to leave that out. But Musk and Senate insisted on keeping it in, and I think the reason for that, I don't know if this is exactly what his actual rationale was, but what I read into it was when you keep the door handles flat like that, it's a branding issue, and it makes the entire car look and appear more futuristic. So even though it doesn't matter in any way, in any sort of substantial engineering way or a product way or use case way, and in fact, it's annoying because it's like harder to open a door until you learn how to use it. It actually turned out to be a really important thing. They got just the press around and the hype around just the door handles was probably worth more than it was probably $1 billion of free advertising.
Now I want to go deep in the AI disruption and also what you are doing at Dry.ai. So a very important question is AI making programmers losing their jobs? Because I have played around with your product and found it allow anyone to build AI-powered tools without coding. So does this mean traditional software development will become useless in the future?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers on that right now. Before we talk about Dry, it's interesting to look at the industry right now where a lot of people are cutting down programming hiring and they're laying off programmers. And they're using AI as an excuse for that. But honestly, I think really the dynamic there is they overhired, especially in the last few years, especially during COVID and afterwards, to be honest. I think that's most of what's going on. Actually, one of the best applications of the new AI tools right now is helping programmers be more efficient. And so historically, when you make a role more efficient, you actually get more of that role because they could be more productive. So in the near term, I don't worry too much about programmers, assistants, and just the kind of automatic coding you get out of LLMs. I think that's extremely useful. We use that in our own company. I know a lot of people who do a lot of impressive stuff like that. It makes existing programmers more efficient and more powerful. But at the same time, you still have to be a pretty good programmer, and you still have to write a lot of code and stitch the code together and deal with it. So I don't think in the near term, because of these tools, that we're going to sort of be replacing a lot of programmers. Now, with my company, and I think that in the fully mature version of that, there will be a lot of things we'll be able to build that current programmers are building that aren't necessary. You can just build them on Dry.ai. It'll be much simpler, much faster, much more effective, much higher quality. I think in that world, what you'll see is a lot of programming effort goes away from actually coding core application work to integrating with Dry or integrating with platforms like Dry. So I don't think it'll theoretically put some programmers out of business, or really what it'll do is let them do other things that are more productive in that new environment.
Yeah, I think what just you have mentioned about there's a lot of software. It can be built super easy. It don't need to cost a lot of time of programmers, and it don't need to hire a bunch of people to do this. My next question is, because today's software is so expensive, right? Every functions you will want a software in your company, but if you buy all of them, it's too expensive. So do you think that company you are building will change this?
Yeah, I think so. The way we describe ourselves is it's a database that's simple enough to talk to, but powerful enough to be your own internet. And what we mean by that is today, if you look at software, what it is a bunch of siloed applications. So basically, if you could think of with an interface, CRM, that's just a database of customers built on top of that. You look at email, that's a database of messages with a different interface built on top of that. If you look at a lot of just Jira, the issue tracking in Jira, that's sort of a list of a database of bugs with an interface built on top of that. And so problem is that in a lot of workflows, you'd like to basically integrate those databases. And the other problem is every different sort of organization and every different team and every different person has their own customizations they'd like to make to the software that they can't make right now because of how expensive it is to do the coding. And the same thing happens in the consumer internet, right? So right now, you have a world where if you want to get movie reviews, you go to Rotten Tomatoes. If you want to get restaurant reviews, you go to something like Yelp. If you want to do search, of course, you go to something like Google, ChatGPT, et cetera. And these are all amazing pieces of software in some ways and amazing services, but they have some challenges. So my restaurant taste is totally different than anybody else's restaurant taste, the average reviewer on Yelp. So for me, a hamburger and milkshake is a really nice restaurant. That's the kind of thing you could build on Dry in a day. And it's much better than Yelp because Yelp has non-football fan taste. Another example is we had a Substacker who wanted to build sort of a Rotten Tomatoes type movie review service for Christian men. So if people could go rate and review movies, but based on their taste and their values. And so what you're seeing is that every organization and every community has its own need for its own custom internet or its own custom software stack and SaaS stack. And so what Dry lets you do is it lets you just build that very quickly, customized for your own organization. And it's incredibly easy to use because it only includes the features you want. You can chat with it like it's ChatGPT, and you can integrate components of it. So if you want your bug tracker to be directly integrated with your internal sort of org chart, easy to do. And so I think what we see, so rather than in the future, rather than having these several different sort of internet platforms that are siloed and separate from each other, or have separate SaaS tools that are sort of siloed and separate from each other, I think ideally all your data lives in one sort of space. And there's a customized uniform interface over all of that that's easy to access to. And that makes everything much more customized and much more efficient.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think I also want to talk about the personalized, because I think what we are mentioning about is everything actually need to be personalized. Because at first the ChatGPTs come out, everyone would think if everyone has a personalized AI tutors or a companion, but later it's not work, then people start to neglect the importance of personalized. But exactly, let's take restaurant as an example. A few days ago, I want to find a list of good restaurants like in Palo Alto or in San Mateo, and I asked ChatGPT and also asked Perplexity. They all gave me a list of restaurants, but exactly not what I want. So I started to realize that personalized is really important. So it's exactly what Dry.ai is doing right now. So what do you think is the big pictures or big visions for Dry.ai in the future?
Well, it's first starting with that little use case of yours. What you could do with Dry is you can create your own custom little Yelp extremely quickly, tell it what your preferences are, and that'll customize your recommendations. And also, if you're on a Discord or a group chat or a Slack with a bunch of friends who have similar taste, again, in an hour or even a few minutes, you could spin up a little Yelp just for yourselves for Palo Alto and San Mateo and local restaurants and rate them and review them yourself. And if you guys care about things like, oh, is it gluten-free or does it use seed oils or whatever it is, whatever your special tastes are, you could add that to the application and it'll automatically be incorporated and visualized. So that's the kind of customization that sort of Dry.ai enables extremely quickly and extremely easily, and just excited to see a future where that's being used everywhere. So in the world long term, I think that was your question, 5 years from now, where do we see ourselves? I think the vast majority of SaaS tools you have and the vast majority of tech, internet, social platforms we have. So we're talking about LinkedIn, Rotten Tomatoes, Yelp, Facebook, and then on the SaaS end, we're talking about things like CRM, issue tracking, mailing list management, org chart, things like Workday type stuff, keeping track of your internal organization, KPIs, scheduling, planning. All of these things can be done in one single platform, one super customized interface that's integrated for you. So ultimately, that's our goal, is like, and I think it's quite possible in a few years to basically start seeing a world where all of those things are transitioned into Dry. And there's precedent for stuff like this stuff happened before. In the history of computing, before people started using Macs and PCs and Windows for most things, it was common to have special vertical computing companies for special platforms. So for example, there was a company called Silicon Graphics that was just mostly focused on data analysis and visualization and computer graphics workflows. And they built computers and operating systems just for that. And there's another company called Sun Microsystems that did the same kind of thing, but for different verticals. And there were several companies like that. And ultimately what happened was Windows and Intel at first in the beginning, and then Macs now to some degree, sort of, even though they were sort of cheap commodity in the beginning, they grew to be able to encompass all of those use cases. I think we'll see the same thing happen in the future, and I hope Dry.ai is going to be part of that.
That's amazing. I think if we want to do that, we definitely need to make our product super friendly to everyone, because not everyone is coding. It's not everyone know how to code, and actually it's not everyone have the energy to build something from scratch. So it's definitely need to be super easy for them, like a sentence or prompt to help them to generate it stuff.
No, but I'm sorry to interrupt, but absolutely, yeah. I mean, with this little Yelp example we talked about, if you guys suddenly decide, wow, you want to find restaurants that are gluten-free or something like that, without any coding at all, you could just right-click on the restaurant item in our platform, add a gluten-free field, and that's immediately sort of percolated throughout the entire interface. The chat and AI capabilities are automatically updated to deal with that. So, and that's the goal, is like everybody, individuals know, people, families, groups, teams, organizations, they know what they need better than anybody. But right now, if I have an idea for something that's going to make my life easier, and it's software, before what I had to do is I had to hope that there was another founder somewhere that had that vision, and that they could persuade a venture capitalist to fund that vision. And then I'd have to wait a year or two for them to actually sort of build that, right? There's a lot of failure points there. It's extremely expensive because basically one little need I have might have taken $10 million of programmers to solve. And it's slow and it's inefficient. And the programmer doesn't know what I want. And the VC doesn't really know what I want, but I know what I want. And so what Dry and AI in general will let you do is let individuals and teams and companies and families create their own software as soon as they need it and customize just for their needs. That'll make them much more efficient, much more effective, much more pleasant, and everything will progress much faster.
Yeah, that will be an amazing world. Like everyone can build them own stuff, and like it seems like people can have a lot of time to do what they want rather than doing job then.
That's right. Literally, I mean, we were talking to a potential customer at a large organization that does a lot of maintenance for their vehicles. And literally, they're using pen and paper to go out and keep track of maintenance and maintaining parts. And then they need to create reports for their superiors. And they're doing that by just piecing together stuff from spreadsheets and Microsoft Word. So you've got these guys who are just really good maintenance people, but they're spending a huge amount of their time fussing around with paperwork and my office tools and so forth, rather than actually doing the real work. And so there's just that kind of slowdown on just ugliness in our entire and inefficiency in most of our lives that we're not even aware of. But we'll see in a few years this stuff can all dissolve. Everything will be much more streamlined. I mean, another analogy I talk about sometimes is oil and the price of energy in general. That, right now the price of gas is what, $4 or $5 a gallon. What if it were $50,000 a gallon, right? And what if all energy were that expensive? Solar, wind, nuclear, gas, coal, everything were just 10,000 times more expensive. Everything would just come to a halt because basically everything would be very expensive. Like even the electricity would be used for this call would be much more expensive. We'd have to think about whether it was worth doing. Products would be much more expensive to produce. They'd be expensive to transport. No one would build anything because they didn't have the money to pay for all the energy for it. So all of progress would collapse. And so what I'm claiming right now is that software is the same way. Software is this thing that's an input to the entire economy. And because software is so expensive to produce, it makes everything in our entire economy really much more expensive and slower than it needs to be. And there's a lot of progress, a lot of new projects, a lot of important efforts that aren't happening because they can't even afford to get started. And so if we can imagine like the difference between $60,000 a barrel per gallon of oil and $6 a gallon gas, not oil, huge change in progress we can imagine because we know what $6 a gallon or $5 a gallon or $4 a gallon gas is. We don't know. We've never seen $3 a gallon, $4 a gallon, $5 a gallon software. We only know $60,000 a gallon software.
Right.
And so there's all this progress that's going to be accelerated once sort of we can remove all that inefficiency from basically everywhere in our society.
Yeah, that's very insightful. So we want to talk about the topic of big tech and also the startups in AI area. So you have lead the AI research in Samsung and also startups. So do you think who is better to drive AI breakthroughs? Who is going to win?
That's a good question. The thing that the DeepSeek issue and little scare there was interesting because I think it made people realize that even though right now these models are incredibly expensive to build, that might change dramatically. If you look at most technologies, once they become commercially viable, then in the very beginning of their adoption, their cost declines dramatically. And we've already seen that a lot, even API use for OpenAI as an example. But so I think it's very early right now. And so I think if these foundation models and LLMs stay as expensive as they are to create, then you live in a world where you have to be big, either a very well-funded company like Anthropic or OpenAI, or you have to be Samsung or Apple or just a giant company like that. And Samsung, for example, at least the last time I checked, was the largest tech organization in the world by employees. And so I think the scale will be an advantage for these companies, and they all have proprietary data that are advantages as well. And there are things they could do to integrate LLMs into their platforms and phones and devices that might all give them a leg up. So I see that as sort of in the near term, one way things might play out. But also, we live in a world right now where it costs, I don't know, what does it cost, 10 or $100 million to train a good foundation model, maybe $1 billion, whatever it is. If that suddenly became $1 million, then everything changes. And so therefore, these companies, sure, they have a head start, but it'll be like any other kind of software field where there'll be lots of opportunities for new startups to create their own foundation models. And it's hard to predict whether that's going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised. One thing I would think about is these models are trained on something like 10 billion sentences or 10 billion words or 100 billion words, right? Whereas the average human has maybe 1 million words that they hear when they learn language. So these models are trained with 10,000 times more data than the average human. And so that tells me there's a lot of efficiency to squeeze out of their training, and training can become much cheaper. And so once that happens, I think everything will change. So near-term players are all positioned because they have proprietary data advantages. They have large amounts of scale and capital to devote behind this. But I think as time goes by, we might find that things change a lot. It's like, again, the earliest days of computers, right? The first supercomputers, right after computers were invented, for a while, computers took up a room. Like literally, and in the 60s, you'd have a room and that would just be one computer. And, then 20 years later, everybody had computers on their desktops. And now basically everybody has a computer on their watch that's 1,000 times more powerful than those first supercomputers. So if you get a similar kind of curve that happens inside of LLMs, I think you'll see a transformation as well in sort of how the technology is deployed over time.
Yeah, exactly. I think talking about the training cost, I also think that these days the valuation of AI companies are crazy. Also, only like the companies OpenAI, Anthropic, or XAI, even the applications like Perplexity, they just announced a new round. The valuation is so crazy. So do you think there is an overhype, or it's a real opportunity, or there's a lot of bubbles here?
Well, as the founder of an AI company, I love the idea of high valuations for it. So, I think the closest analogy I can think of, it's not a perfect analogy, but was the internet boom in the 90s, where you had, giant companies with no revenues even getting billion-dollar valuations. And that was a bubble, but at the time, there were companies at the same time, that, like Amazon being one of them. Yahoo, for a while, was quite successful after that. But that stayed on to be very successful. So you can look at it in a number of ways. I mean, you could look at it as, yes, for any given company, the valuation might be high, but overall, if you maybe bet in a lot of these companies, you're pretty shrewd about it, maybe one of them is bound to sort of give you a good return. But I'm lucky I don't have this problem right now, that I don't have to find good investments in AI. But yeah, I'd worry about it. So again, I think what you'll find is an awful lot of companies are overvalued, but there's a few that are really wildly undervalued, even if they seem overvalued. I mean, Amazon seemed overvalued in the late 90s. You would have loved to have bought it, in the late 90s. So basically, I think it'll be a mix.
Yeah. Talking about that, I think when the OpenAI and also all the AI startups are focusing on the big models, they are all talking about the AGI, right? So do you think we are getting closer to AGI, or there's still a long way to go?
Yeah, I think there's still a longer way to go than people think. And if you look at the history of AI, I don't know if you remember the Watson thing about 10 years ago, where IBM Watson came out. It blew a lot of people away. Everybody thought, AI was coming soon. You might remember Boston Dynamics. You should go back and look at their videos. And there were these incredibly videos of robots doing human-like things and superhuman-like things. Everybody thought robots were going to take over the world. And then if you just look at the history of AI, going back 60, 70 years, something would happen. When I was a kid, it was about chess. Like the computer becomes sort of the world's chess champion. And so suddenly, wow, computers are smarter than people. And it always turns out to be less, it's impressive and it was an advance, but it didn't sort of take us to AGI as fast as people thought. And so I think it's the same now. I think that we've obviously amazing progress we've seen in the last few years. And parts of that progress will be part of actually what does lead to AGI. But I don't think ChatGPT 6 is going to be AGI, to put it that way, or 5. I think it's going to be another fundamental sort of innovation or transformation that's going to lead to that. And I don't think it's going to be scale that's the problem. I think it's just going to be having the good ideas to make it happen.
Oh, I see. I think like when there's a GPT-3, it's coming up with the transformer, and then after like GPT-4, the scaling law kind of like broken, or it's not broken, but just costs too much GPUs, so they are start to go into RL to do reinforcement learning, and it come up with the O1, O2, and also the deep research these days. So do you think what is missing today in AI? So what is the biggest technical limitation holding AGI come to us?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think part of it is that if you look at what humans are good at, it's things that are more than just predicting what the next word is going to be in a stream of text, or things that are implied in that. And so I think over time, what you'll see is that just like you're finding you add some RL to an LLM, that you get better LLMs. I think there'll be 5 other things like that you could add to LLMs that I think will make them better. And I think, I have some ideas for that. I think one of them would be this idea of ontology. And so, if you're writing a traditional computer program, you have data structures, you have, types of objects, and the objects have fields on them. And the objects are organized into hierarchies and taxonomies. And that's, it could be called an ontology. And I still think it's very important. I think if you have these ontologies and you find a way to integrate those well with the LLMs, I think it'll solve a lot of problems with the LLMs. It'll be more precise. They will hallucinate a lot less. You'll be able to train them a lot faster. And so figuring that out, I think, is going to be an important problem for the future. And in a lot of ways, my entire research has been about that, about finding ways of integrating different kinds of AI methods. And ontologies has always been one of them. And we've always found that by incorporating some ontology in anything you're doing, you can get dramatic speed ups and improvements. And so an example of that is there's a lot of work on retrieval augmented generation, where you don't just have the LLM, but you have fancy algorithms that go out and when you ask it a question, it just doesn't answer from the LLM. It goes and retrieves other relevant information from a database or from the internet or somewhere else, and then it adds it to the prompt and the question you're asking to the LLM and gives you an answer. So that workflow right now, we just think of that as like a hack, as something that we're doing now until we actually figure out full AGI. I think actually that is part of the solution, is getting better at doing things like RAG, that's retrieval augmented generation, and integrating that more closely in how we build LLMs and so forth. So I think that kind of integration with other kinds of methods is going to be a big part of the future.
Yeah, amazing. If you had to start a new AI company right now, would it be in what area and what you are most excited about?
That's a good question. You could tell from what we said earlier about ontology and so forth, I have ideas for how to build better foundation models using methods like that. And that would be interesting. Also, another interest of mine is longevity, living long. And so I think human lifespan is now 120 years max. I think it's possible for it to be 1,000 years. I think it's possible in 100 years, you and I could be doing a podcast on Europa, Saturn's moon. I think it's Saturn, some other planet's moons. And so that's important to me, that longevity, life extension. And I think that there's a lot of ways AI could help with that. I don't have definite ideas of that, but I'd love to do a survey of that at some point and see what the best way it could help is. I think one thing is there's already so much work that's tangentially related to that field, but it's actually disorganized and doesn't replicate very well. And the researchers don't know what each other are doing, and they get away with having bad study designs because no one's really checking up on them. So I think there's a way of using AI. So it's like an AI-enabled Google Scholar, where basically you can use AI to much more quickly assess and integrate and evaluate research. And I think that can make science literally an order of magnitude more efficient and faster and have more progress. And of course, I would rather do longevity than other areas of science first. But long story short, that's what would be interesting to me. But I don't have anything too concrete there. It's just a thought that I know there's an opportunity there.
I see. It's a really important question. Important.
Yeah.
Everyone is living right now, right? Another question is kind of like I want to ask, what's the most exciting AI breakthroughs that nobody talking about? Because I think these days everyone are talking about large language models and also how to use AI in coding agent, in sales agent, and also how to use AI in chatbot. So what is the most things that people maybe neglected, but it's really important to us?
Well, honestly, I'll be obnoxious and answer the question this way. It's something that everybody's talking about, but nobody thinks it's a breakthrough. And so that would be like what I was saying earlier about the retrieval augmented generation. So right now you use ChatGPT or Claude, for example, you ask it a question. Oftentimes it'll go out and get information. You could ask it about who is the pilot of that plane that just crashed recently, right? Or something like that, right? It'll give you the answer. It doesn't give you the answer because it was trained on that data. It gives you the answer because it goes out and retrieves relevant information and uses that to answer the question for you. And so that's already actually started to really, to my mind, at least in my own use cases and what I see in other people, is break into sort of traditional just search use cases. So that's interesting, where really I think you can see a near-term future where search will be much more efficient that way and much more powerful. But I think much beyond that, I was urging earlier, I think we'll get so much better at that pattern of retrieving stuff and then augmenting your generation and your prompting with that. And there's lots of ways to make that more sophisticated. And there's a lot of work going on there that, again, people talk about, but they act like it's just some hack we're doing to make our systems better. It's like some engineering sort of game, but not something that's really important. I think that really, it's a breakthrough, whether people know it or not. It's going to lead to a lot of other breakthroughs. And so that's what I would say. That needs to be, it's already being talked about, but not that way. People need to recognize that that's actually a much bigger component of progress that we're going to have in the near term than a lot of the other things people are talking about.
I see. I definitely would pay attention to this, right? And also looking for companies doing this.
That's right.
Right. So last question is like, there's lots of AI founders, right?
Yeah.
We live in Silicon Valley in San Francisco. You come out of door and every random person in the street, maybe they're founders. So
that's right.
But you as a series founder, you have also successfully sold your company before. So what's your advice to all the AI founders?
My advice to them is don't think of yourself as an AI founder. Like you're a tech startup founder. And so the same rules that applied, the valuations are a little bit different, but the same rules that applied 10 years ago apply now for 90% of the startups. So basically, have an early niche market that you're going to sell to. Really build up something people really want to build. Have some kind of unfair advantage, whether that's your data access, your business development connections, whatever it is. Have a good, robust team. Just everything you would have advised to a startup before AI, I think applies to the vast majority of startup founders now. And I think if you go around thinking you're special because you're an AI founder, then it's probably you're lazy. And so basically what it means is that you really need to think through because like you said, everybody's an AI founder now. And so what you really need to do is just think through how do startups succeed? How did they succeed 5 or 10 years ago? That's how they're going to succeed in the future. What can I do to sort of make my startup succeed? Of course, there's exceptions to that. If you have some groundbreaking technology that makes foundation models 20 to 100 times cheaper to build, then that's sort of non-standard. But I think the vast majority of people who are calling themselves AI founders don't fall into that category. And so they just need to sort of forget that they're AI founders and just be founders and good founders.
I see. Exactly. Yeah. Make the point. So thanks for joining me today, Nick. It's a great talk.
Likewise, it's been good talking to you.
So please remember to subscription. Wait, I will say it again. So please remember to subscription channel and to learn more about Silicon Valley and AI founders.